So our scripture reading today comes from Hebrews 13:1-2, and you can follow along in your digital Bibles or your real Bibles or the screen behind me. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, I'm really excited to invite up Kenneth and Juliet. So Kenneth Wang is a professor of clinical psychology at Fuller Theological Seminary and a licensed psychologist. He and his wife, Joanne, are parents of 2 adult daughters, Juliet and Caitlin. Caitlin, I think you just graduated, right? Yay! Congratulations. Juliet is their transgender daughter, and Kenneth will be reflecting on his experience as a parent in that journey. Juliet Wang uses their pronouns she and they, is a trans, lesbian, and Taiwanese-American multidisciplinary artist dedicating herself to film, microtonal music, and writing poetry and prose. She also works as the community engagement specialist at the Trans Latina, correct? Yeah, Latina Coalition, an intersectional nonprofit that advocates for the transgender community and is a trans school creative writing fellow. Very accomplished. So please welcome Kenneth and Juliet.
Hello. Yeah, we're honored to be here sharing. And at New City, I've been experiencing new things. Today was also something new with our worship led by Anne. And also, we're going to be talking about a parent-child relationship. And today I also learned something new about Juliet. Growing up from Taiwan, Joanne and I, we didn't grow up in a dance culture, so we really didn't know how to dance. To the point that when our kids were in elementary school, we were worried that they wouldn't fit in because they didn't know how to dance. And so I remember Joanne buying one of those dance mat, high school musical wee thing to train our kids. But recently...
Just dance.
Okay, yeah. And recently, Juliet mentioned taking a dance course. So today was the first time of seeing Juliet dance. And who would have thought it would be in the church context? Okay, we are honored to be here sharing about our transparent journey. And I've shared about this before, about a year or so ago. It was a brief version from my perspective. And today, I'm very grateful that Juliet is with us, and then so you will hear from her perspective. There's about this journey. And this journey is the hardest part of my parenting over the past 25 years. Who have thought it would have occurred after our children became adults? But also, I think through this journey, I think is the most blessed part of my life, of being a dad and being a parent. So we'll talk about this journey and try to be as transparent as possible. I know it's easier for me to just share my perspective when Juliet's not here because it's just my perspective. But with Juliet here, I think it's a different feeling. You'll hear from her perspective, which might be different from how I experience things. And we didn't rehearse what we're going to share, so a lot will be on the spot as we talk about different incidents, experiences. A little bit about my background. I'm a Christian psychologist, and over the past 2 decades, there was a very big tension in my life in the world of being a psychologist, in a world of being a Christian, especially going to more conservative churches in my past, in the Midwest or in Taiwan. And there was this part of me that through psychology we learn about queer people and also their experiences and learn about how to be affirming. But also this part of my Christian church teaching that has made it really hard, and for me to not know how to get through certain verses in the Bible. In the past, what I did was I just basically compartmentalized these two parts of my worlds. I had queer friends, my best friends through graduate school, different working experiences were queer, but they weren't Christian, and we just avoided the sensitive topics. So I was good friends with them, and then at church, I would avoid. I wouldn't confront people and just kept them separately. It was easy to tuck away this tension until one night. I remember it was a night when our family was watching a movie together. It was during COVID, and somehow we paused in the movie, I think for a bathroom break or something, and Juliet came out. She said, "By the way, I'm binary, non-binary." When I get nervous, I say things wrong. So,
Do you want me to say what happened?
yeah, you can say what
specifically?
happened. Yes, please.
Okay, so we were watching the show This Is Us, and there was a character who's non-binary in that show, and like for a while I've been like kind of like thinking that maybe I'm trans, and at that time I was like, I think I'm non-binary to myself, and I told like a friend, and I didn't have a plan to like come out to my family at that point, but I was like thinking like, oh, how can I like, oh, it just comes up and I just say it or whatever. It's like not a big speech or something. And then like there was this character that was non-binary in the show, and then my dad was like, oh, or like they use they them pronouns or something. And then my dad was like, oh, like your friend uses they them pronouns, right? Because I have a friend that's non-binary. And then I was like, yeah. And then I was like, and I do too. And then like they're like, oh, okay, cool. I don't remember what they said exactly. Probably like, you know, we love me no matter what or something. And then we just kept watching the show. Like it was like 5 seconds. But then afterwards we talked about it more. But yeah.
Yeah, I remember it was very disorienting when I heard about it. I think we kept watching the show, but as a psychologist, I thought, okay, this is the moment I should seize. I should follow up on questions. So after we finished the show, I remember spending about half an hour with many questions. I had many fears, concerns about, okay, what does this mean? Is this, how should I respond? How should I interact? How did you figure this out? What will your future be like? And how was there anything that, as a parent, we did, or why didn't we notice? A lot of questions. So we spent about an hour. I remember talking about those questions, and Juliet was pretty gracious in terms of sharing sharing her answers with us. And I was pretty disoriented. Like this image in the back, where some words were also misspelled, a lot of quiet questions, and also, so we went to bed, and I think the next morning, or the many mornings afterwards, when I wake up, I would feel very disoriented, like in a different world. I felt like I didn't know Juliet. I didn't know how to interact with her. She was no longer the boy that I saw for so many years. And I didn't understand what being non-binary meant. And it was quite challenging. It literally felt like there was a stranger in my home. And it was during COVID. So it was in my home. And we didn't have much space. We just interacted with each other over that time. And next, we will share a little bit about our journey, and we'll highlight a few instances that I thought was transforming for me, especially learning about Juliet, and also getting a sense of how my assumptions were very different from Juliet, your reality. So I'll talk a little bit about at the beginning. It was probably many months that I was shocked. I was trying to compartmentalizing it was especially hard in two situations. One was seeing Juliet dress more feminine, and that was not something that I was used to. And and I remember, and then Juliet would be my COVID buddy. We would shopping buddy. We would be the two people that would go out of the house to get groceries, buy stuff. And I remember as Juliet dressed more feminine, I would get nervous going out with Juliet, and many questions about how she might be perceived. Also, especially during COVID when Asian hate was heightened. And I remember a time when I thought, okay, people who have cancer, their friends, they shave their heads to be in solitary with them. And I thought, okay, I have some pink shirts and stuff. I'll try to do that with Julia because I know it's very uncomfortable and she probably feels very uncomfortable. And I will try to be, in solitary with her. And there's one day I was just curious. We were walking and I asked Juliet, what is it like to be dressing differently?
Yeah, so like he talked about that concept, and I guess I talked about like how when I dressed like more feminine, like it felt like euphoric or like gender euphoria, and that I felt more like myself, and that it wasn't like I guess having cancer and like being like, oh dang, my hair is gone. But more like, oh, like I'm dressing more like how I feel, feels good to me, and like expressing myself the way I want to. So it wasn't something that like, I mean, of course it is like scary to go out in a different way than you're used to and like how people might look at you. But that it is like more something I wanted to do rather than like, oh, I have to do this.
Yeah, that was very enlightening for me. I think I realized I was projecting my feelings onto Juliet. It was very helpful to learn about that. In another conversation that comes to mind is there was also one hypothesis. I had many hypotheses of what's going on in this process, and one was I felt like Juliet had throughout her life been someone who was very conforming and or like be very stressed or perceived our expectations as a lot of stress and needing to meet them. And for me, I felt like, wow, this decision, this coming out, being non-binary, being trans is such a huge thing. And then I thought, okay, I'm curious, and also I want to say something good about it. So I remember during one of our walks, I mentioned to you, Juliet, I mentioned that, oh, you this is a very big risk, a very big step that you've taken. I'm very impressed with your courage. It's very different from the you that I know, and then what you shared was different from what I had in mind.
I think what he talked about was like, oh, like this is like you made like a big decision to be trans. And I think it is like a decision to come out, of course, and to transition. But I talked to him about how like the decision, I didn't decide to be trans, like that's just like who I am, and I kind of discovered it. And then decided to like live the way that like I actually was, I guess. So that was like the distinction I made.
Yeah, and also that was very helpful for me to listen to and learn. I think even though I had a lot of thoughts, but I think at that phase, I was very grateful that Juliet was sharing about her life with me. It was at a very different from the level of conversations that we've had throughout our lives. It was so much in depth, answering a lot of my questions. I was learning so much. So even sometimes I didn't fully understand, I just kept that in my heart, and then let it marinate and learn more. And I think a lot of the things that you've shared, I think as I journeyed along the way, I've learned more and then experienced more about, oh, this is how it makes sense, how it's so real to you that I don't understand because I'm cis. And I think one of the most emotional moments I remember was doing our trip, road trip as a family. So we took a road trip. So a lot of driving, a lot of just us in the car. And I remember one day, I think we were in either Northern California or Oregon. And one day, or maybe 2 days, you started to talk it more in a feminine way. And it was very hard for me. And I just felt like there's this part of me that I was getting used to how you dress differently. But now I think there's a personality change too in terms of how you talked. And I remember you used to talk more confident, more strong. And the way you talked, I perceived at that time was more soft. And I felt like it was like, oh, you were scared of me or something. And I try to hold it, but I think the second day it was really hard for me. And I remember right before we got to our Airbnb, I just couldn't hold it anymore. And I told you, like, Juliet, don't talk like that. And I was meaner than this. But I just let my emotions out. I couldn't control it anymore. I remember getting off the car, we were unloading, and Joanne came up to me and said, that was very hurtful. I reflected on it and I thought, yeah, I'm grateful Joanne shared that with me. I think she was right. And I remember going up to you to apologize. And I'll let you share your version because I was very grateful that you accepted my apology.
Yeah, I think it can be hard when like someone like doesn't know what's going on and then they like project certain things, like I guess like him thinking like I was scared of him with the way my voice was. But I think one thing I told him is that like I was so for like trans feminine people, like hormones doesn't change your voice. So voice training is how you change your voice. So like practicing and stuff. For trans masculine people, hormones do change their voice. Like just like they don't have to, like it just happens automatically. But yeah, so I told him that like, you know, I was practicing and that I wanted to sound more like what I imagined I was like in my head, I guess. And that I actually like the reason I felt like I could practice around my family was because I felt more comfortable with them, and that it was not that I was scared of him or the family, but that I was more comfortable with them. That was why I was doing that. Yeah, and I think just in general, it's always good to communicate. I think like if like we had talked about it beforehand, like, oh, I'm trying to practice my voice and stuff, then like he wouldn't have thought like certain things like read into it that way.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was most emotionally touching for me was you mentioning that you were relaxed and happy and safe those 2 days. I think I just projected my emotions. I was frustrated, confused, and I felt like, wow, you were safe, and then I all of a sudden hurt you. And I think that makes it quite emotional for me. And throughout this process, I've also been aware of how I felt in my process of Juliet's transition. I noticed that there were different stages. One of the stages was, learning the pronouns and trying to use the Juliet's preferred pronouns. And then
I
also,
would also add, I don't really like the term preferred pronouns because it's like, oh, like I want this pronoun versus just being their pronouns. Like that is just like it's not like you want, I mean, you do want to be called he, him, but that's just like what your pronouns are, you know? So I would add that.
that makes sense. Thanks for, highlighting that. And I think that was one of the stages. And then there was also, I remember a moment, we were watching our home videos from when you were little. You weren't there home that day. That was the day the last day before Caitlin went off to college. So we watched her 2-year video. And when I saw you there, I don't know, I just kept sobbing and sobbing for like half an hour nonstop. It felt, the way I sobbed felt similar to when my brother died, or this felt like my boy son was dead. But it was very cathartic, releasing, and I felt like getting that out helped me be more able to accept that that son boy is no longer, and then to accept my new daughter. And I was very grateful at that moment. It's what's different is that when we lose someone we love, sometimes we wish they would appear in a different form in us. So what was different from that moment than losing my brother was like, you're still here, but you're Juliet, you're my daughter. And so I felt that was different. And I also was aware then there was this emotional acceptance, but that was also different from a perception. I felt like it was acceptance, but perceiving someone was at a different level. And I remember the first time I was able to really perceive you as a woman was when you were a lead role in a play as the female lead. And I was like, because you were that character, and I thought, oh yeah, she's a woman. And that was when I realized I accepted emotionally, cognitively, but there was that emotional perception that was at a different level. Yeah, and one of the ongoing things I would continue to wrestle with is misgendering. And I think I appreciate that you shared with me how each time I misgendered you, it was so hurtful that you would have to distance yourself from me for a few hours or a day or two. And thank you for sharing that with me. I think as from my perspective, sometimes I feel like, it's just an accident. It's not something that I did on purpose. I accept you, I love you, and all that. But I think it was helpful to know from your perspective of how much it hurt. Maybe you can share a little bit, because I know the misgendering is something that a lot of us, we make mistakes on.
Yeah, I think it's because it had been a while, months or maybe a year or something, and then it would happen sometimes, and I think it feels hurtful because it makes you think oh, how does the person really perceive me, and are they just saying these pronouns when they say it right? Is it just they're just saying it but they don't really see you that way, and then their natural self is oh, I don't actually see you that way, and that can hurt, and also just it being a long time, and that after I'd come out and still it happens, it feels oh, are you trying enough, or are you practicing and stuff like that? I understand mistakes happen and stuff. But even when I know like that, like he is like cares about me and he doesn't mean to do that and it's an accident and stuff, and I don't feel like, oh, he did something evil towards me or something, but it still hurts because it makes you feel like you're not seen as who you really are. Even if it's an accident, even if it's not intentional, it's kind of like microaggressions, like that term being about like something that can hurt you even though it's not intentional from the other person. um yeah, so
Yeah, and I think sometimes when I talk with friends, colleagues, or relatives, and when they misgender, I cringe inside. That helped me realize, for you, it probably hurts 20 times more than my little cringe. One of the shifts in our family dynamics, I remember it was when you told us that you were planning to go through hormone reparative therapy. And I remember Joanne and I had more of a stronger reaction at that time when you shared. I felt like somehow we felt like this is impacting the body or physically beyond psychologically, and then we kind of had some pushbacks, and I know it was really hard for you, and wanted to see if you like to share some of your experience during that night.
yeah, so they just sat me down and basically were like, oh, like I don't think you should do this or you should wait, and then they had their like arguments and stuff. But and then I listened to them and I like told them how I felt about it. And I was like, I appreciate your concerns and that, like, you're afraid for me in certain ways. And I know that comes out of a place of love. But at the end of the day, it's like my body, and um, I don't feel like I have to convince you, but I'm just gonna choose what feels best for me. But I appreciate hearing your concerns. And I mean, I think it was like a healthy conversation, and then I still went on hormones. Um, and they didn't like be like, oh, you can't or anything. But I think it's okay to like express your concerns, if it's not a way that feels like I'm gonna force you to do this, but just to have this open dialogue where everyone can share how they feel.
I felt like that was also a turning point. I think for me, I realized it was too hard to hold my emotions in check and also try to communicate. And as therapists, I thought maybe as a family, we needed a therapist to facilitate that safety and allow us to just be us, communicating. And I think that's when we started to explore. And then we saw Gary for a while. I don't know if you want to share a little about your experience of family therapy with Gary.
Yeah, so we went to see a family therapist, like my parents and my sister and me. And I think it helped us a lot. And I feel like we originally went there because of my gender, but that it really uncovered a lot of things in our family that we needed to work on, regardless of my gender, like unconnected, especially in the ways we communicated with each other, which was we didn't. And like it came a lot from like their upbringing as well. Like their parents didn't really communicate very much, but I think therapy, like the thing that I found most valuable about that was that we learned how to communicate with each other in a safe way instead of holding things and like resenting each other, or assuming things about each other. And I think, yeah, family therapy can be very helpful, even if no one is trans.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We realize we learned a lot about our family dynamics. And in terms of, as we wrap up this part, I'm thinking the things that were helpful, family therapy was helpful, of course. And I think another part that I thought was really helpful was us going on walks. I think we made a decision that we would go on walks once a week, and during the walks, I would ask questions. I had a lot of questions during that time, and I felt like you were very gracious in terms of answering questions and also saying that I can ask, but you can also not answer if you felt like it was too personal. And I remember only once you said, "Oh, this is a bit too personal," and you didn't answer. But all the other times you answered, and you really invited me into your world. And I'm very grateful for that. Wonder how you felt about aspects that reconnected us.
Yeah, I think the walks were good, and that's like something we started doing and continued doing for a while. And I mean, in my memory, it wasn't like just about my gender, but just like in general connecting with each other. And I also walked with my mom. Um, and yeah, I feel like our family didn't have that much time we talked to each other. And I think as a kid, well, not just as a kid and a teen, and like up until like my early 20s, I feel like I had a very hard time opening up to people. And I think part of it is like a history of like we moved a lot when I was kids. So like I moved 8 times. And like I guess it was hard to connect to people because I felt like, oh, they would just leave or I would have to leave subconsciously. And so it was very hard for me to open up to other people about myself, even small things that didn't matter. Like, oh, like how do I feel about this food really? Besides just saying it was good. Um, but then I think like I learned, like I had like my first real close friend in college where I shared things with, and like it was like hard at first to share things, but as I did it more, I became more open, and I think that helped a lot with talking with my parents about my gender journey.
Oh, thank you for sharing. And as I reflect back on just how I mentioned that you were like a stranger to me, and one of I think the concepts that was really helpful, or what I tried as I reflect back that I tried to do, was being hospitable to a stranger. In the verse that we talked about, and here's a quote from Harry Nouwen that I think is really helpful. And it can be applied not only in this situation, but also to people who we feel like are very different from us, people who are not, who don't think the same way, or people who we're not familiar with, we're uncomfortable with. So this is hospitality towards strangers. This is what Henry Nouwen said. When we say you can be my guest, if you believe what I believe, think the way I think, and behave as I do, we're offering a love under a conditional situation for a price. And this leads easily into exploitation, making hospitality into a business. So I think being able to allow the other person who has different worldviews, different experiences, to just be and to share that experience, I think was one of how I felt reconnected with each other. And as I wrap up, I talked about initially I had this about 2-decade tension between my Christianity and my view of queer people. I always wanted to be affirming, but I felt like there was this line. I didn't know how to interpret the biblical verses. And I'm very grateful for not only our experiences, but also later when we came to New City Church. I think there's different aspects of it. I felt like this was a place where I could talk about being a trans father and my experience, as opposed to having to keep that separate from my conversations with my other church friends. I felt like coming here, being able to be around my queer brothers and sisters was very life-changing for me. I think before that I had queer friends, but none of them were Christians. So being able to see how God loves you and how you love God and witness that relationship was so powerful. It reminds me of when Peter got the vision from God to eat those unclean things, creatures. He was scared. But when he prayed for the Gentiles, he saw God's Holy Spirit be in their life and baptize them. It was like that kind of experience. I saw and witnessed how God was in the life of my queer brothers and sisters. That was undeniable, and that was way beyond what the verses had, what they say or how I interpret them. And then after going through the classes, one was led by Michael and Daniel. That was also helpful to learn cognitive theologically from Matthew Vine's perspective, and it gave me a way to look at it. And I'm very grateful, like from that picture on the bottom, and I feel much more integrated now. And I think this is the peace, first time I experienced this peace between my two worlds over 2 decades. So something that turned out, that was the most challenging aspect of my parenting journey, has been one of the biggest blessings of my life. And thank you for the opportunity, allowing us to share.